Hey, everybody, welcome to the Called Up Podcast. I am Chris Peters, the Prospects Podcast, that is. And we've got our pal Cam Robinson with us as always. Cam, how the heck are you?
I'm doing well, buddy. How you doing?
I'm doing well. It's been a busy week, but lots to get to, and it's starting to get to that second half of the season where everybody kind of is starting to feel that 2025 NHL draft pull. There are some teams that are way the heck out of it, and so their fans are already looking to the draft lottery odds and trying to figure out if they're going to get the top pick. And we're obviously getting to that midterm stage of our evaluations, our decisions and rankings and different things, both on FloHockey, on Elite Prospects. We got a lot going on. So we will talk about all of that. Also, NHL Central Scouting released their midterm rankings this week. So, I mean, as prospect writers do, we're going to look at it. We're going to get some opinions. And I always think, when you look at the Central Scouting, it's kind of like having the 33rd team, if you will, in the rankings. So, Cam, we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're also going to get to our regular segments like Beyond Belief. We're going to have we got a ton of questions from fans. So we had to narrow that down. But if you are a Chicago Blackhawks fan, you'll want to stick around till the end because we have some real good discussion coming for you on the number one overall pick. If in fact Chicago gets it again, which would probably not make a lot of people happy in the hockey world. But hey, what are you going to do? So anyway, Cam, let's get to it. Let's talk a little NHL draft, and let's talk specifically about the Central Scouting Rankings. And again, they're a body, an independent body. They work through for the NHL. Largely, it's to give fans an idea. It also is a service for the teams. What their rankings are, just like our rankings, are not gospel, but they are a bit of a guide. And I think they're a guide that is enough informed enough and historic enough that we can generate some opinions. So I'm going to throw this out to you first off, just to kind of get some general thoughts. I mean, we saw Matthew Schaefer was number one among North American skaters. Eklund was number one among European skaters. Any initial thoughts in terms of how the top of those rankings looked as far as you're concerned?
Well, they got it right. They got it right off the hop there. I think Matty Schaefer is the number one prospect in North America, and I think Victor Eklund is the number one Euro. And it is not a lot of competition on that Euro list, but for my money, Eklund is that top dog. And so yeah, a nice start for Central Scouting there, I think.
Yeah, and I think especially at this stage, I mean, we've seen over the years there have been some very different opinions. Sometimes they're outside of the mainstream, sometimes they're very in line with the mainstream. But this really seems to have captured where the winds have been blowing on the number one discussion. We've been talking more and more about Matthew Schaefer being that number one prospect, being the top guy. We had a segment last week where we discussed that at length. And so, we don't necessarily need to spend as much time on Schaefer, but it's more about what came next. And so, you look at Central Scouting in terms of what they did on their North American rankings. James Higgins comes in at number 2, Michael Misa at number 3, Porter Martone at 4, and then Roger McQueen, who has been injured for quite some time, is there at number 5. But, I think in particular, I know you tweeted about this, that Roger McQueen has kind of been a bit of the forgotten man because of the injury, but he's also part of this discussion and obviously now on the outside looking in. But what did you make of the order of Higgins, Misa, Martone, McQueen, and how does that similar or different from how you feel about it?
That's literally my top 5. So I think they started off red hot. That's exactly how I have the top 5 right now. We just had Roger McQueen verified on EP, and I posted in our Slack channel, and I said, the fifth ranked prospect in the draft. And our CEO there, Peter Sibner, is like, I think he'd go even earlier, and he's absolutely right. That's kind of like 1 to 5 for Roger McQueen, and I did tweet that. What that NHL scout told me is that, like, people are forgetting that this is a 6'5" center who came out, like a rocket this year. And then obviously the injuries derailed him. Hopefully he's back in a couple of weeks and can come back and be healthy and show out. And then there's no reason that he couldn't be next time they drop this list, that he couldn't be in that, he could be as high as 1. He's that good.
Yeah.
He's that unique with his size and playing the middle of the ice, and he has the offensive talent. He's going to make teams really scratch their head at the top of the draft, especially like if they need a D, it's easy money. It's Matty Schaefer. But then, are you going Hagens? Are you going Meese? Are you going McQueen? What center do you like? Or do you need the winger and you going Martone? So there's going to be a lot of intrigue and kind of team specific needs that are probably going to come into play here at the top of the draft.
Yeah. So, I think anytime you've got a player that's been injured and you haven't seen him for a while, it's very easy to forget about him, but it's also easy to think about the risk profile that a player like that brings. I think if you kind of go back and you look at, what happened with Caden Lindstrom last year, it didn't prevent him from going in the top 5, but in hindsight, maybe it should have, really, we don't know what the next steps are going to be for Caden Lindstrom. He hasn't played this year. There's really not a lot to know. And I think for players that, especially bigger players like McQueen, when there are injuries, whether it's whatever, knees, backs, shoulders, whatever, there's always different things that I think people are, concerned about long-term. I don't get the sense there's a lot of overwhelming concern about that, but he's an intriguing player. And I think he's a guy that now, as he gets back, as he gets into the lineup, if he continues down that path, I don't think there's any doubt. But again, we got to see it first, right? We have to see it when he's healthy. So it's going to be very fascinating to watch that. Now, I also wanted to talk to you about the top of the European list, and we talked a little bit, about a few podcast episodes ago about, Frundell has kind of fallen back. I think he's starting to kind of rebound a little bit. At least, in terms of how he's played so far. I don't know if that's necessarily that he's rebounding in terms of his draft stock quite yet. But, I think that's interesting. Eklund being number 1, really not a surprise. Rabkin being number 3, not much of a surprise. Now he's going to be in North America, so I guess they're going to have to switch their lists when they go to the next one. And, after that, it feels like the drop off for the European prospect. I mean, there's a few in there, but it does feel like there is a significant drop, and really, I mean, it might even happen after Eklund. It might even happen after Frundell, depending on how you feel about Rabkin. And if he's the 3rd best European prospect, and we were talking about him potentially falling out of the first round, what are we looking at for European-based prospects? Now, this doesn't include the Euros that are over here playing. But again, even that, you've got some, but it just seems like we're at a very North American heavy draft this year, and specifically a very heavy Canadian draft this year.
Yeah, it is. This is a bleak turnout for the Euros this year, which is unfortunate because it's oftentimes, we're seeing some of these guys push up and filling that first round, getting 20-25% of the first round or more. But there's always the opportunity, and I maintain that even though how saturated the scouting market has become these days, that there's still market inefficiency with the Euros. That's where you can probably get your best value later in the draft, is by targeting some of these junior players in Sweden or in Finland or in the Czechia, and mining for upside and finding those kind of inefficiencies, as I mentioned. So again, this is a down class for it, but there's going to be some kids on that list, on that Euro list, that are down the line going to be NHL players, and they weren't projected to be so. So if you have the good scouts and they have the quality eye and you trust your guys and you give them an opportunity to make those picks in the 5th or 6th or 7th round, they still might be able to pull something. So not all is lost, but it is 100% a North American heavy first round this year, and draft in general, with that focus on Canada for sure.
Yeah, no question about it. And really, I think the other thing that is of note here that you mentioned is this is where your European-based scouts become so valuable, where your crossover scouts become so valuable in these kinds of years, because we see it every year. We're going to say, hey, this isn't a great year. It's not the best, but there are going to be plenty of teams that find guys. And so, I think, especially those of us that do this in the public, we're obviously doing, our rankings and different things, but you look at the work the European scouts are doing, the amount of work that they, the different places that they travel to, and the ability that they can see these players. It's going to be very interesting. We're going to talk a little bit more about some of the specific regions here in a little bit, but I want to get back to the goalies as well. So North American goalies, and again, it's always difficult, I think, ranking goaltenders for any draft. But this year in particular, it seems like a lot of the attention is on Joshua Ravensbergen from Prince George. He is the number one goalie in North America. But after that, again, we're starting to see this kind of drop off. I think one of the more interesting notes is that, at least in terms of the goalie that probably most people know for this class that they would expect to see at number 2 is Jack Ivankovic from Brampton. But Jack Ivankovic is a 5'11 goalie in an era where, if you are a 5'11 goalie, the amount of special you have to be is there. To be number 5 even on Central Scouting's rankings, I think is an accomplishment, maybe. But to you, Cam, and I'll offer my opinion on this as well. When do we expect to see Ivan Kovic drafted? I mean, I know you talk to a lot of the players and a lot of those CHL players, and they marvel at the young man. But where is a realistic range for a player? And now that we see midterm rankings, he's 5th among North American goalies.
Well, let's just think about it like this. Dustin Wolf was like back-to-back WHL goaltender of the year. I think he got maybe CHL goalie of the year in his draft year, or that might have been his draft plus one. But just insane metrics, right? In the CHL, insane 930s, 940s, putting up huge numbers at 6 foot tall. He went in the 7th round. Like, he was one of the last players picked. And yes, I was shouting from the bleachers, someone take Dustin Wolf, for God's sakes. And look what it's doing for Calgary now. He's a player. He's 6 foot. I think they have him maybe even listed at 6'1" now, probably generously listed. Ivan Kovic is generously listed at 5'11". So that might be up on those skates or up on the tippy toes even too. So like you said, it is incredibly difficult to be a starter in the NHL at that size. Like, it's UC Saros and that's it, sub 6 foot, right? It's even at 6 foot, it's super difficult. There's Wolf is one of the only ones. Jarl Halak was one who could do it. We're looking at a guy like Devin Levi. I think he's tagged at 6'1". He's really struggling to transition up, good numbers in the AHL, struggles in the NHL. It's really difficult. And so a lot of people saw Ivan Kovic get named to Team Canada. He was the starter of the U18 or at the Holinka, and then, makes it as the number 2 for the World Juniors, had himself a good showing at the OHL game last night, top prospects game. He has these moments where he shows and people are like you said, he's probably the most recognizable name on there. But I've been adamant. I've been steadfast. Good kid, good junior player. Doesn't look like he's elite enough to me to be a viable NHL starter down the line. So in that case, it's like, are you burning a 2nd round pick on this kid? Or are you looking in the 4th or 5th and be like, he's got pedigree. He's a good player. Maybe he can tack on a couple inches here late in the growth spurt. And if not, you give him a chance, you run him through your program up the development chart, and then he kind of burns out in the AHL. But for Josh Ravensbergen, doesn't get the Canada invite, doesn't make that team, but he is probably like the best tracked goaltender in his draft year in ages. And he's 6'5", and he's got all that calm confidence. They nailed that one, right? He is the top netminder in this class. And for my money, like, I wouldn't be all that concerned using a 14th or 15th overall pick on him because of how this draft class is. And if you're banking on pure upside, you're going to have to wait a little bit longer on a goaltender as per usual. But at his size, with his ability, his lateral agility, his rebound control, everything goes into it. He is a top flight goaltender prospect who could very easily project to being a 1A, a true starter in the NHL. So I'm looking at those two. I do think it's night and day on size, and then I think on skill level too. And it's just that Ivan Kovic, he's not playing on a great defensive team, so he's not putting up a 930 save percentage because he's not on a really rock star team where he could be potentially, but he's still not stealing games for that club at this level, or really locking it down for them where they can only have to score 2 goals. So good kid, good player at this level, but I definitely have my doubts that he's going to be a true NHL product.
Yeah, if I'm all these NCAA schools looking at CHL players, I'm probably circling Jack Ivankovic as an option for me. And saying, hey, yes, and even as a a smaller goaltender, I think that's I think that's an option. But you mentioned Ravensburgen too, and number one, I mean, I feel like that's been the discussion the whole way here. It's all about the upside. I think that we're talking about him in similar fashion, the guys that have gone in the first round. I think that NHL teams are talking about him as a guy that could go in the first round. I think it's absolutely possible that he goes as high as the 15-20s, somewhere in that range. Maybe he goes even higher for a team that's desperate for the position, if they believe that strongly in it. I'm always of the mind that it's all an odds game. It's all a probabilities game, and the probabilities with goalies, especially the ones that you take early, have not been great unless you're pretty certain. But I will say that goaltending scouting has gotten more advanced, and I think that as a result, players like Ravensburgen get a chance, and guys like Ivan Kovic get the deep dive that they deserve. It's not just he's 5'11", move on. It's we're going to actually look and we're going to figure it out. And I think, but again, still it comes back to, but he's 5'11", and so that's the thing. It does matter, and we're talking about fractions of inches in terms of what can be the difference between stopping a puck and not stopping a puck, and the bigger bodies will do it. And there are a lot of guys kind of down further on the goalie list. You start seeing some of those 6'6", 6'7" goalies that are kind of, hey, we don't know what they're going to be, but they're 6'6". So,
you can't teach size. You can't teach
they got
size.
that. So, So it's always interesting to see kind of how the goalies factor into the whole discussion overall, but that's kind of where we're at. All right. So one thing that always happens, and I mean, hey, we hear it about our own lists, people that disagree with what we do. Where were some of the areas that you felt maybe, you've been very complimentary of Central so far. Where are some of the areas where you feel like you differ significantly from where they had players?
Wait a minute. People disagree with our rankings? I haven't heard any of that. It's never come across my desk.
Yeah,
it's nothing but positivity.
Trash.
No. So yes, I've heaped praise. I've given them their flowers for getting the first 5 right for North America, getting the top 3 right in Europe, and I won't even push too much further past that. But yeah, we got some gripes too. We got some gripes. A couple that jump out to me is, Jake O'Brien at number 8 for North America. It's a little rich for my blood, especially when you got guys like, you got Carter Bear at 13, who I think he's like Seth Jarvis. Like he reminds me, we've talked about it at EP before. He's got a little Seth Jarvis to him. And, at 13th, that's putting him in that kind of 15 to 20 range. Put him around 10 for me all day, Carter Bear. Where O'Brien, I think he's limited a little bit on his pure offensive upside at the next level. I think he's going to be a good two-way center, but if you're taking him in that 8 to 10 range, that's a little rich for my blood. And then just another one that really jumped out to me is Sasha Boumediene at 18, Cameron Reed's at 27. I think Blake Fiddler was at like 22 or 23. I prefer those two players easily over Boumediene. What he's done at school this year, I just every time I see him, he's vanilla, like very, very vanilla, like okay tools, but just doesn't do anything that really jumps off the page that would really warrant a top 20 pick for me. He won't be in my first round. So we're a kid like Cameron Reed. Yeah, he's only 6 foot, but I think he does a lot of things really, really well. And that if you wanted to put him in like the top 15, I wouldn't have a problem with it. Blake Fiddler, he's 6'4". He's got lots of tools, really shows out well in club play. And then you add that size element to it. And it's like, now you can project him down the line a little bit further too. So if we're talking about upside and just kind of some dynamic skills, is those two for sure. And then, we can talk about Logan Hensler closer to it, but, Hensler at 10 is very rich for, again, a player has some tools, but again, I just have a really difficult time being like, what are you going to do at the NHL level that stands out other than your skating, which is good, but it's not electric. Yeah. It's not dynamic. He doesn't use it in those ways. He's just really smooth out there. And it's been really disappointing, I think, for him. He hasn't taken those steps developmentally yet. So those are a few that jump out to me.
Yeah, I'd say that, Hensler is one of those ones too, where he's become a bit of a polarizing guy. You talk to teams and talk to different scouts and talk to people that do what we do, and there's a wide range of opinions on him in terms of what he ultimately can be. And I think that there is, at this point, the evidence hasn't been there to support a player that belongs in the top 10 discussion. I personally am not certain he's a first round draft pick. I actually I think you think about guys that have gone in the second round that profiled like him, that I think were profiled better, like Brock Faber, who
Olin
went
Zellweger,
Cullen Zellweger, like guys
yeah.
that have like, because the thing is like you look at the World Juniors and you look at what Hensler did, and he was good, not great.
Fine.
Like, I mean,
Yeah.
he was fine. Yeah, exactly. He was fine, and he is a player that I so badly want to like as a first round talent, because you do see their size, there's the smoothness, there's some athleticism there. There is, he will occasionally make that play where he shows that escapability, or that he made a read and he made this great pass, and or he shot up the ice, and sometimes you do see those bursts of skating where maybe it's not dynamic, but it's super effective, and then you're always like, wow, there are pieces there. He hasn't always put them together at the same time, or for an extended period of time. So that's one of them. The other guy that's going to be polarizing, I think, because of the size discussion, is going to be Cameron Schmidt. And Schmidt comes in at number 30 on NHL Central Scouting among North American skaters. Incredible scorer, a lot of high energy kind of plays. There's exciting skill, but again, the size, under 5'8", or around 5'8", it's very difficult for those guys to make it. So this isn't necessarily a gripe, but I did want to pick him out as a discussion point, because I think that he's another guy where there is a fairly wide range of opinions in terms of where he is. So, I think personally, for me, in a year like this where I'm not super enthused about the class, I might bet on a player like that, who is smaller, who has that, but I don't think that he has that same. Sorry, go ahead, Cam.
No, I was just going to say that edge to his game too, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think about guys like Logan Stankoven and different guys that kind of had, there was evidence there that this guy is going to produce. He's going to, give you effective shifts. He's got a little nastiness to him, those kinds of things. So I'm just curious where he falls for you, and where, because I looked at that, and that was one that just stood out to me as I looked at the list.
Yeah, so I'm sort of on an island at Elite Prospects on Cameron Schmidt. I'm lower than the consensus is there, and so I continue to get outvoted because there's so many more that are on the pro side. I do think he has, near special offensive abilities, like not superstar or anything like that, but I think that it's an elite set of skills that he has offensively when he's being utilized in the right spot, and he has a playmaker down the middle that can really work with him. Versus a playmaker on the other wing, like we saw at the Holinka, where it was McKenna and Schmidt on the wings, and it wasn't really working all that well. I don't like his shot selection. I think he shoots from too many bad angles. So there's some issues with his game. But yeah, you brought up Logan Stankoven, who I put 17th overall in his draft year. Undersized, played a lot bigger than he was. Had that low center of gravity, really strong, a leader, like a proven love teammate and a leader, hard-nosed, high-end skill, still fell to whatever 47 to Dallas, right? That was a mistake. He should have been a first-round pick. Dallas got the better of that deal for sure. But then you look at Schmidt, who there have been some whispers in NHL circles that, maybe not the most beloved teammate, maybe a little hard to deal with sometimes with his effort level. If he's not going, maybe that there's the energy is not there for him, or on the back check or in the defensive zone. So Stankoven had all those things going for him, and he was a little bit taller, and he still fell to the second round. So I'm not at all surprised to see Cameron Schmidt here tagged as basically a B-level prospect, right, at 30th for North American skaters. That's projected to be a second-round pick. That's where I do kind of expect him to go. Could a team swing at 25 or 27? Absolutely, especially because of how light this class is on high-end skill. But knowing NHL teams, maybe Carolina, maybe they're quick to jump on them at the end of the first. But knowing how these teams historically and traditionally select their players, if Cameron Schmidt's sitting there at 50, I'm not surprised. I think that's just how it is with his size and his skill set, and just the way the NHL has trended historically. I think that this is kind of part and parcel, this ranking of just the general consensus. And speaking with NHL teams and scouts and stuff, that's kind of how they see it too, is that, If he was 5'10" and he was doing this, yeah, sure. Yeah, he's a top 20 prospect. But at 5'7",
Yeah.
not so much, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So yeah, so those guys tend not to get the benefit of the doubt, right? So
Yeah.
that you have to prove a lot. And so I think again, it comes down to probabilities. And so like like I said, I didn't necessarily disagree with the ranking, but I just wanted to have that conversation that we just had about him because I think it helps. We're gonna get into I mentioned we're gonna get into the European thing, and we're gonna get into that in just a little bit. But the one thing I did want to say is, how do we think about Russia right now in terms of how many of those players are we going to see go in the first 3 rounds? Beyond the ones that are in North America. I mean, it's getting harder to see, and I think part of it's not just about about the player evaluation. It's also about the development. Like, you are putting that player into the hands of somebody that gives you no say, no control, unless his contract's shorter or they get out of it like some of these other players have. So, just based on the view of certainly of Central Scouting, there weren't a ton of Russian players that were super high on that list. So I just wonder if are we starting to see the dwindling of the Russian superpower kind of in hockey? Is that the trend, or is it, can we just still see Demidov, Michkov, other guys, it'll still be the trickle that has kind of come through the last few years anyway.
Yeah, I mean, top players are going to still be top players, right? And like you said,
Yeah.
Demidov, Mishkov, Yurov, not Levshinov, but Salayev. Like they're still producing their high end ones. But I think you're right. I think that the developmental model over there isn't so much about development, not to the NHL anyways, it's development to the KHL, right? And so it's also an ebb and flow thing, as we're seeing all of Europe is kind of low this year. Finland has like some really weak crops coming up their way. USA is, got some weak crops coming their way too. Like it does ebb and flow, and I don't think that we can just take a quick snapshot. But this is a very weak Russian class. They don't have the Demidov, they don't have the Mishkov, they don't have these that high end player. Like quite comfortably, I would be fine with no Russians in the first round this year, and I don't think too many teams would get upset about that either. And that's just purely on a skill basis, not having to do with anything that you're talking about. Is where we have no say in their development. We don't know when we're going to get them. We don't know how anything's going to break. If they're going to get conscripted into the military or what. So it's there's a lot going against Russian players right now to be selected early and often. But like I said, if you're good, you'll get picked early because the upside it's all about that upside, baby.
Yeah, absolutely. And teams are still watching them. Teams have Russian-based scouts. They have ways to see those players if, they're playing the U20 team in Kazakhstan. There are ways to see players without having to actually step foot in Russia. So there are ways to do it. But either way, that's where it is. So we've got a few, we're staying mostly draft themed here for most of the show. And that brings me to our fun segment that we enjoy. It is Beyond Belief, and we moved it up in the show because I think that it needs to be higher in the show. For one, because I think we get some good discussion out of it. If you haven't seen the show before, haven't listened to the show before, Beyond Belief is where we'll take one statement, each of us will share with the other, and then we will kind of either debate or agree, or we'll decide if that statement is true or possible, or if it is beyond belief. And I will kick it off with this one. The Chicago, and we're going to talk about the Blackhawks twice in this show, so we're going to talk about it at the end as well, but we're going to do it right now. The Chicago Blackhawks have the worst record in the league. That Matthew Schaefer is going number one, even if it's the Chicago Blackhawks. Cam, your answer.
I was told, not by anyone in Chicago, I'll say, that they've like basically painted themselves into a corner with their recent selections by passing on a kid like Demidov last year for Levshinov. They took Kevin Korchinski, recently. Like they have some big blue liners already coming up. Vlasic too. It is that they kind of have to take a forward. they can't just keep Bedard on an island up front all alone. And boy, how nice would it have been to have just taken Ivan Demidov and have Demidov and Bedard running around together. And then, oh, look at that, we can add Matthew Schaefer. If you do end up in that pole position, or number 2 in a team that lets him slip to that spot for you. I would much prefer that compared to Levshinov last year and, Haggins or Misa this year. I think they downgraded by going that route, but no, I think that is beyond belief. I think that if they end up at the 1 spot, they're taking a forward. Even if they like Matty Schaefer better, I think they're going forward at that spot.
And at the end of the show, we're going to talk about what we would do ourselves in that situation. So that's, based on that's what you think they will do. Then we're going to talk a little bit at the end of the show about what each of us would do in their situation. So stay tuned for that. I thought you put that well. I think that you're right on that. But we will definitely save more meat on that bone for the next phase of that conversation. So Cam, I now turn it over to you to provide me with the statement in this Beyond Belief segment.
Okay, Simon Wang will be the first Chinese-born player selected in the first round. Beyond belief, or is that true?
I think it's beyond belief that he'll go in the first round. I do think that he will be, the highest Chinese-born player selected, and certainly is going to be a legitimate prospect for the NHL. If you don't know about this player, he is currently committed to Boston University. He played most of this season in the OJHL with the King Rebellion. Has lived in Canada for several years now. He may even have dual citizenship on that one. Although Cam, that's just me looking at elite prospects. Shameless plug there for you, but seeing the little Canadian, the little slash flags, as all the guys call them.
You must have it then.
But anyway, yeah. But anyway, he's a 6'6" blue liner who can move, who has skill. Those guys don't grow on trees. And so there is a possibility that he'll go in the first round. He was ranked 23rd in North America by Central Scouting. Now, he has left King Rebellion. He will spend the rest of this season with the Oshawa Generals. And so that is a change for him as he goes forward in this path. But I think going into the first round, like, he's played 5 games in the OHL already, hasn't gotten any points. I think that, he's still kind of adjusting to that. We'll see how things go at Boston University. We'll see where things end up. But I mean, obviously a very impressive player, a very intriguing profile. He really did, point up in the OJ. And I think that he's proven that he's a little bit, he's a unique player. So we look at players like that have that skill. Last year, Anton Silayev was kind of that player, but he was doing it at the KHL level. It's an apples to oranges comparison, aside from the fact that it's 2 big defenders that can actually, play with the puck a little bit as well. So I think there's a lot to like about him. I just don't think that first round makes a lot of sense to me. Just based on what I've seen, I think that some of the, he needs to get stronger, refining the decisions. But there is an absolute project that I think teams would be eager to work with because of the physical profile that he has and what he's shown so far. And now if things change and he starts really pointing it up in the OHL as well, we might have a different conversation later.
Yeah, I think you used the right word there, project, right? He is a project. He's unrefined at this point. He doesn't do anything all that advanced with the puck. His skating for his size is fine. But I think, I saw him earlier in the year and I would say it was underdeveloped, whether that's strength, whether that's mechanics. Like, it's just generally not a long and really powerful stride at this point. It's fine. But yeah, he lacks creativity with the puck and with his vision and offensive skills, but he is 6'6", right? And that is going to get you a long way. And so I will say that is fact, just because this draft is light on defensemen. Mm-hmm. Teams cannot help themselves to reach on a defenseman. And I think that a team will look at him and be like, okay, if he was a righty, I'd be like, yeah, he's going in the first round. He's a lefty, so it's not locked in, but I think that he's going to end up there in the tail end of that draft, just because a team's going to be like, we can work with this. We give us 3 or 4 years, we can make this into a real player, and potentially a unique player, because like you said, they don't grow on trees, those 6'6" guys.
Exactly. And he's also a July birth date too, a July
Mhm.
07. So he's one of the younger guys available. So there's a lot of runway for this player, which is what I think will be really, really fascinating to watch. And I did play 38 games with the King Rebellion, and in another shameless plug, you can go ahead and watch any of those games on FloHockey, as we are the official streaming provider of the OJHL. And now my illustrious co-host, I have an important statement, and this is one that there's one particular listener that I know is probably going to agree with whatever we say on this, but also be very upset that we brought it up. And that is that the first Finnish player selected in 2025 will be picked before the third round.
Oof. Beyond belief. It could definitely happen. It could definitely happen. You know, someone. I wouldn't be picking anybody before 65 from Finland this year. You know, is it Bolius? Is he going in the 60s or the 50s? Yeah. I don't know. You know, I'm not jumping up and down to do that. You know, is it honestly like, yeah, I'm probably waiting. It might even be the fourth round. It might even be the fourth round this year. It's that bleak in Finland this year, and I'm sorry to all those. Joki Nevalainen has to scout these guys for the Canes, and our boy Lassie has to do it for us at EP. So unfortunate for you guys, but yeah, it's that week this year. I'll say that one it's not happening.
Yeah, I picked that, and because I just, you know, we were going to talk about it a little bit earlier, and I was like, let's put this in beyond belief, because honestly, it's kind of shocking. You know, like, look at a Finnish development model. It's been very effective. But, you know, I think when we go to the under 18 World Championship later this year, I mean, we're talking about a team that will they make it out of the quarters? I doubt it. You know, like, it's a really tough year. And it also stands, you know, as you look at the NHL Central Scouting Rankings and you see the first Finnish player is on there, I believe at 10 in Bolius. You know, there's some other like Czech players that are based in Finland and other things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But like, that also goes to show you, if that, like, we're talking like, that's how light it is right now in Europe, which is really, really strange to see. And you know, you wonder, what are the reasons for that? I'm sure we'll have to, you know, do a deep dive on that at a later time. Man, what a strange year. And I just, if you are the European scouts this year, you know, hopefully you get a raise just for having to put up with some of the hockey you've had to watch this year. So right. Anyway, it happens. There are down years everywhere. It's cyclical. I don't think Finland's going to be down for long, but this is definitely not looking great. So I think that I believe I'd say it's beyond belief as well. Okay. So now I turn it back to you, my friend. And now I get to turn on my own country.
There you go. That's right. The National Team Development Program, who has been for years supplying the NHL now with elite talent, high-end draft picks, will not have a current player drafted in the first round. So sorry, Jimmy Hagens, Logan Hensler, you guys don't count. You're not there anymore. Talking this version, which might be the worst version since I've been doing this job of the NTDP. They will not have a player drafted in the first round this year. Fact or fiction? Beyond belief?
Boy. Yeah, you know, I think and we're talking current players. So James Hagens doesn't count. Cullen Potter doesn't count. You know, these are, you know, Will Horkoff no longer counts because he went to Michigan. Yeah. You know, so like all of these. So with that in mind, I think it's fact. And I think that it's jarring to see it. You know, Will Moore has been one of the guys that we've talked a lot about. I think Jack Murtagh is another guy that has been in that mix. Charlie Trethaway. And there is a chance that those guys could potentially be first round draft picks, but I haven't seen anything from really anybody there. And I think there's going to be like a run on NTDP guys in the second round, probably. Guys like, you know, Moore and you know, McKinney could sneak into the first, is another one that could sneak into the first round. You know, they're playing in the All-American Prospects game that is coming up. It's the day that we're recording it. So, but yeah, but I mean, like, you look at that and you know, Hagens and probably Cullen Potter are probably going in, you know, the first round, and we'll talk about Cullen Potter in our Q&A section as well. But, you just look and they lost Will Horkath midseason. He immediately goes to Michigan and starts pointing right away. He's a big man. So it's been a tough year. And they've struggled in pretty much every position. I guess another guy that we kind of can forget about is Carter Amico, who was injured and done for the season. Another guy that has first round potential. So I think that this could be the year that we see 0 current NTDP players making the first round at this stage of the season. Obviously, that can change, but that's where I'm at right now.
Right. Isn't it crazy? What was it? 19 there, where there was like 5 or 6 in the top 15, right? Like it was crazy. Right. I'm glad you brought out Carter Amico though, is that he's kind of that weird wild card that, again, so much size. I could see a team getting all weird and taking him as a reach. If you're going to reach on somebody, maybe a team would be interested in him. Not to say that I would do that. But yeah, Jack Murtaugh, none of these guys scream first rounders to me, but this is such a light class that I just feel like some team's going to do it, that some team's going to do it anyways. Just take them from the program because it's the program and they're going to BU or they're going to BC and it's a good trusted development path that I could see it still happening. Just because it seems so weird not to, right? But it is a very weak class. It's hard compared to previous years where it's like you get up for those NTTP games, you get up to see them play the college teams, and now you're just kind of like, it's a big man.
Yeah. It is definitely an interesting year. I think for the American class in general, you kind of have James Hagen's on an island right now, and Hensler and others, they're there, but. And there are a couple of NTDP alumni in college hockey that, I'm sure will be picked, but we will get into that a little bit more. So, Cam, I used to do this a lot on my previous podcast, but we are, I took a lot of questions and I got a ton of questions today from people that wanted to be in on the podcast. And so we're going to do it. We're going to turn our show called Up the Prospects podcast back to the people. You will help us. And you know what the dirty little secret is about this, Cam? This is basically me. Like, I'm not sure what the next segment is supposed to be. Why don't I let the listeners decide? And you guys, as you did with the old Talking Hockey Sense podcast, delivered the goods. We were looking for questions hashtagged with called up the prospect or called up podcast. That's the hashtag. And then also we're looking for NHL draft questions specifically, since we're so focused on the 2025 NHL draft in this episode, and you guys delivered. And we're going to start our questions with Jack. And Jack is the one who asks, where do you guys see Cullen Potter going in the draft? And if you don't know Cullen Potter, he is at Arizona State University this season. He was formerly at the National Team Development Program. He accelerated, was initially committed to Michigan State. They weren't ready they didn't really have a spot for him. He decides to go to Arizona State, where he has been a pretty critical piece to a team that I think has surprised a lot of people this year with how they've been. So, Cam, I will let you go first in terms of range, in terms of where you think Cullen Potter is going to end up.
5'9", not super electric, putting up, half a point a game in the NCAA, nothing to sneeze at, especially when, he's just turned 18, maybe like a week ago or something. Like it's close. I think anywhere in the kind of 20 to 40 range is kind of where he's going to live. Maybe 25 to 50 even. But again, because he's accelerated and he's playing NCAA, you have a look at him at a higher level. I thought it was strange that he just up jumped from the U17s to go to school. And then when Michigan was like, we don't have a spot for you, he's like, all right, well, we'll go to Arizona. I thought that was an interesting decision for him, but maybe he was reading the tea leaves, that he thought that the program, the U18 team wasn't going to be that strong this year and he wanted a better challenge. And I think that's probably helped his stock rather than being kind of on that team, that U18 team right now. So yeah, I could definitely see him being a late first rounder, but at his size and with his tools, I think he's better served as a second rounder. What do you think?
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I think that, you look at where Central Scouting had him at this point, and he's 22nd on Central Scouting. So that's a guy that's kind of on the cusp of that first round discussion. And in this year, whether the European skaters are so weak, that's basically them saying that he absolutely is in the first round discussion. What I will say about Cullen Potter is he has fared far better than I thought he would this year. He's a little over half a point per game, which is not necessarily when you look at the draft eligible freshmen and you look at what James Higgins is doing and what other guys have done. Not necessarily all that impressive. I think that he is an incredible skater. His speed is a weapon, even at the NCAA level. And there's a lot of things that he has done well. And I was very worried about him in the NCHC. This is their first year in the conference. Meanwhile, Arizona State has found, they've competed with everybody. They swept Denver earlier this year. They just split with North Dakota. So like they're doing it, and I'm impressed by that. But I agree with you. I think the profile, the fact that if he were dominating college hockey this year, we would be having a different discussion. He's been a good freshman. He hasn't been exceptional in any single way, but he is a player. So I think early second round, just because of that skating in particular, I think that he has the ability to change things with the skating. But I know like there was a lot of people scratching their heads that he was leaving the NTDP when he did. And in the end, it probably did work out well for him because I think he's got more of a showcase. They give him all the ice time he could possibly want there, and plays in the power play and other things like that. So, I think he's got a real opportunity to do some interesting things over the course of his collegiate career, and then obviously, we'll see where it is. But I think I'm with you on that one, early second rounder. All right, let's get to our next question. And this one comes to us from Soft Serve Scouting. And this is #CalledUpPodcast. Why is there so much concern over if Michael Misick is a natural center or not? In my eyes, he's the best 200-foot player of the top 4 forwards and plays down the middle. The only flag I've seen is his wing play, 50-50 in the D zone. Do you believe Misa or Higgins has a higher offensive ceiling? So let's tackle that first part, that last part first, because I think that is a pretty significant discussion point when you're deciding, do I prefer Michael Misa or do I prefer James Higgins? What say you, Cam Robinson?
Yes, interesting question indeed. Michael Misa's bigger, he's stronger, he's faster. I think he's got a better shot. I think Higgins is the better playmaker. I think handles, you could probably maybe call it a wash, maybe give the edge to Higgins. If I'm projecting them out long term and they're both down the middle, I think that Misa probably has the higher pure ceiling because he is 6'1" and he's faster. And he's a little more dynamic in that regard. If we're talking at this moment in time, I think Higgins is the better offensive player. His vision is a step ahead of Misa's for sure, I think. Now, before we get into the center discussion, I'll let you go off on that one too.
Yeah, so real quick on that, I think that the hockey sense differential, that's the separator for me between the two players. And I think that James Higgins' compete has been underrated to a certain extent. I mean, I think that the people that see him regularly understand like he gets after it. The issue is, unlike Misa, he doesn't necessarily have that physical strength, doesn't have the ability to potentially use that compete in terms of that physical aggressive nature. But I think Higgins is really, he is finding more ways to create offense. So I think but to me, I think he's the smarter of the two players, but I think you're also right on a lot of those other kind of different grades where it's the physicality, it's the skating, different things like that. So let's talk about that though, as in terms of pure center. I think that I'm less concerned about Misa. I just think that the threshold for being a top 6 center in the NHL is so high. And I'm even starting to think like, let's just use that Blackhawks example. If I have either one of those guys and I have Connor Bedard, where am I playing them? If I'm the Blackhawks, I'd love to have a James Higgins that can set the table for a Connor Bedard, but then I've also got now 2 undersized forwards on the same, like those kinds of things. You have all those different discussions, but where do you land on the Michael Misa as a center in the NHL discussion? And then we'll go from there.
There's a bunch of people that I really respect and trust in the game on the NHL side that question whether he's a center. And maybe in my more immature days, I might have just defaulted to being like, okay, they know what they're talking about, so I will also parrot that response. But personally, I think that he can be a center. And I think that at this point in time, he projects to be a center. I know that there are some questions about the details of his game in the middle of the ice. But personally, I think he's got the speed. He gets it in the middle of the ice. He attacks that. He penetrates defensively. I think he switches and understands where he needs to be. If anything, he does look a little lost when he plays on the wing. Like we saw at that CHL Top Prospects game against the US. Desnoyers was playing in the middle, and Misa just wasn't as effective. He just wasn't as good along the wall and on the breakouts. He needs kind of that ability to flow, come down low, be that breakout option, get the puck, give it back, move it, whatever, take it and run through the middle of the ice. I personally think that he could and should and will be a center unless he lands on a team where they already have, like if he goes to Anaheim. Slide him over to the wing. Sure, right? They've got 15 different guys that'll, like, is he going to bump Mason McTavish or Leo Carlson? Probably not, because now you've got your size and your skill down the middle, and then you put him on the wing. But if it's Chicago, is he pushing Frank Nazar and Oliver Moore off to the side? Yeah, I think he is. I think that he's the guy that you want down the middle there.
Yeah, interesting thoughts there. Yeah, and I think, really for me, it's always they're a center until they prove they can't do it. Really like that, and that I think you draft them with the idea that we're going to see how it goes. We're going to see how he develops. We're going to see where everything goes and what he can be. But I think, in terms of the aggressiveness, the physicality, the different things that I think that he has continued to stack up and add on to his game over time, and not just be just a pure skill and production guy. I think that's probably helpful. And I agree with you. I think sometimes players don't ever figure out their unnatural position, and in the end, it leaves you wanting a lot more from that player. So I think, the team that drafts him, and if he is going to go in the top, 5-6 picks, they're probably drafting him to be a center. So a lot of interesting things to see. I think some good points brought up there by Soft Serve Scouting. But we are going to move on and talk a little bit about defense, because, a lot of discussion about defensemen in this draft has been focused largely on Matty Schaefer, but this is not about Matty Schaefer. We're going to talk about Jackson Smith instead. This one comes from @Pazuzu14. What are your thoughts on Jackson Smith? And do you think the gap between him and Schaefer is as pronounced as it's made out to be? #CalledUpPodcast. Cam, I'm going to change things up and start, and then I would be very interested to hear your commentary. I just think the gap between Matthew Schaefer and everybody else is the Grand Canyon when it comes to defense. And I like Jackson Smith. I think he's a first rounder all day. I do think that there is a significant difference between the two and how they think and approach the game. And I think that, Schaefer's is the more well-rounded of the two. But Smith has been very good, and we see him in these situations where you put him with top tier players, and he looks like he belongs. The CHL Top Prospects game, I think there were some decisions that I didn't love. There were some reads that I didn't love, but at the same time, this is a guy that moves pucks extremely well. There's a real skill element to his game. He's got size to him. He's got mobility, but really, I think the question isn't how does he stack up against Matthew Schaefer? It's about how does he stack up against everybody else. I sense that you feel the same way as I do on the Schaefer front. So I wonder if maybe you could expound a little bit on how he stacks up versus the field when you kind of take away the top tier guy.
Yeah, Matty Schaefer, obviously, like you said, he's in a class by himself, and that divide is massive. Not to say Jackson Smith isn't a good player, like you said, 6'3", mobile, creative. Some of the things he does in club play, like he can do some fancy stuff. Like he can make guys miss. He can embarrass a little bit at the line, like by shaking and baking. And And he can jack up some points. He's going to be a good player, a really good player, I think. And when he plays with offensive players, then he kind of switches up and he plays the heavier role, the defensive role. He's got a good stick. I think he gaps up well. I think he's physical in front of the net. He can retrieve pucks. He does a lot of good things. So comparing him to the rest of the field, Radim Murtka, Blake Fiddler, Logan Hensler, just as I'm saying all these names out loud, man, this D class is weak too. Hey, outside of Schaefer, I think that you look at him and Murtka, both playing in the West. Murtka's 6'5" or 6'6", so he's got a few inches on him. Far more raw than Jackson Smith is. Murtka got the edge on the Central Scouting ranking, and I think that we're going to see some other outlets kind of follow suit and have Murtka in that 6, 7, 8 spot. Where elite prospects, we had Jackson Smith, I think, as high as 7. Going back, maybe to our first board. So we liked him as a top 10 pick all the way back. So I think he's right there at number 2. But is he going to be the second defenseman off the board? I think a team is going to jump on Murtka because he's 6'6" and he's super raw. And that teams are going to be really interested in how raw he is. But again, we're looking at a guy who's also very young for this class in Jackson Smith. He's a May birthday, so there's lots of runway left for him developmentally too. But yeah, it's Schaefer and then it's everybody else. And there's nobody that you can be like, there's a first pairing defenseman outside of Matt Schaefer. A couple guys would be like, there's top 4 guys probably. But I think it's Schaefer as the first pair guy. And then you're hoping to kind of catch a really nice developmental train on some of the other ones. And in 5, 6, 7, 8 years, maybe you've got yourself a first pair guy too.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, I think that's where we're at. And the thing is that, when you look at the top 10 of any NHL draft, where does it go? It's typically going to be centers and defensemen. So we're still talking about Jackson Smith potentially being in that range. And so it's not to slight him to say that the gap between him and Schaefer is pronounced. It's more just to say Schaefer is that much further ahead than everybody, but it still means that, that Smith is in this mix. All right, we got another team-specific question, and these are always interesting and difficult sometimes. And so since I don't have a good answer yet and have to think about it, I'm going to put you on the spot, Cam. So
good.
Assuming the Flyers pick in the 6 to 12 range, which center from the 2025 draft do you feel would complement Matvei Michkov the best? # called up podcast. And that one comes from Nabil. So please, Cam, shed some light on this for us. Who of these centers available in 6 to 12 would potentially be a fit to play alongside Matvei Michkov?
Gosh, eh?
Yeah.
The problem that's holding me up is that would be the best fit to play with Matvei Michkov. I could tell you who, if you wanted a center, who I would pick. But who would fit best? Is it Braden Coots? It's a little rich at 6, maybe not at 12. Is it Caleb Desnoyers? Who's kind of he's ripping it up, best player on the best team in the queue. I don't think Frundell would be that great of a match with Michkov personally. Carter Bear. I do really like Carter Bear. But again, I'm gonna go with Braden Coots on this one. As a fit, because I really like his playmaking and he could set up Michkov, and I think he's really underrated playing kind of on a poor team in the West. And I think that's going to hurt his draft stock. But I think a team like we've seen some of his flashes are like super high end. It's just that he can go dark for stretches too. So I'll go with Coots just because I don't think there's a great answer sitting there for it.
Yeah. I think if you're number 6, if you are as high as 6, you're hoping that the guy is Caleb Desnoyers. I think the reason I like Desnoyers for that particular role, and the thing is the further back you get, the less and less likely it becomes you're going to get Caleb Desnoyers. I think that he fits kind of the mold of he can do a little bit of everything. He is willing to go dig out pucks. He can be an F1 when you need him to. He can be a guy that is going to drive play to a certain extent. He doesn't necessarily have that soup, like he's skilled, but does he have that dynamic play driving kind of center vibe? Well, no, but if you have a Michkov, if you have a guy with his offensive intelligence, you need somebody that's going to get him the puck. And Caleb Desnoyers is around the puck an awful lot. I like the way that he plays. I like his work ethic. I like the compete that he has. I think all of those
He's a
things
winner.
matter. The winner. Yes,
He's a
exactly. I mean,
winner.
like, you know,
Yeah.
he does so many things well. I see him as being like that guy. Again, though, like when you break it down and you think a little bit more in terms of different things like size, you know, he's six, like closing in on 6'2". He's grown a little bit. You know, he's got some thickness to him. You know, and I think that's kind of another thing that you need with Michkov. So to me, I think if you're hoping upon hope that maybe you get a shot at a Caleb Desnoyers, although I think Coots is an interesting one. I think he'd be, again, like I agree with you. I think it'd be high, you know, to go there, but I just like the idea. I also feel like obviously Desnoyers' brother is in the Flyers system, or has been in the Flyers system. So, you know, like it's not just that though. I mean, like he's a completely different, he's a different animal is Caleb. So, but yeah.
I like that.
All right.
I think
These
you're
are
right.
always, well, thank you very much. All right. Our final question comes to us from Doc, and Doc asks, who are some players that you suspect might fall in the draft, who might not deserve to? Hashtag called up podcast. Always difficult to answer this one at the midterm, I feel like. However, you can kind of start seeing, and sometimes when you look at like a central scouting list, you might start to see some of those players that could potentially dip further away. So I guess one perhaps for you, Cam, that you, one or two or three, even however many you want to say, that you think will drop further than maybe they should.
I'm going to go with Victor Eklund. I'm going to go with Eklund in that spot. Yeah. And I think that, you know, I said Carter Bear's got a little Seth Jarvis in him. Well, Victor Eklund is like the better version of Carter Bear, but he is a 5'10", 100 and whatever, 65-pound winger. And teams are going to look at that and be like, am I taking this at number 5 or 6? And they're not going to take him, even though I think he probably is like the 6th best player in this class. But I don't think teams are going to line up to do that. I think that he's probably going to slip out of the top 10 even, just because of his physical profile, despite the fact that he's one of the most tenacious players in the draft, who like thrives getting inside body position, fighting for pucks, you know, lifting sticks. He's a bit of a thief in the night on the back check, excellent on the forecheck, goes to the dirty areas, plays the bumper and takes some abuse near the net front, does all the hard things, and is proof you don't need to be 6'4" to win puck battles. But I do think that he is going to fall despite having the skill and the will to go higher in the draft.
Yeah, I think that's a good one, you know, especially kind of towards the top. I think if there's a guy that I'm looking at, sometimes I'll go a little bit further down the list. If there's a guy that I think has some more favorable, like I like him and think that there's some real talent there, but doesn't necessarily profile in the way that NHL scouts love players. I look at some of the guys we talked about, Cameron Schmidt. I think that's one guy that is an example of where you can find some real value on a guy that probably slips further, maybe even further than he should. You know, I think that there's other guys that could potentially be in that conversation. One guy that we've talked about on FloHockey quite a bit that I like is Ben Keevan from the Des Moines Buccaneers. Highly skilled player. He's been injured off and on this year. You know, he's spent a little time with the NTDP, went overseas with them, has done a few things. I think that he'll probably be part of that group that plays in the under 18 world championship and different things. So, you know, that's a player where I've seen the tools. I've seen a lot of the different things. He doesn't trend, like, you know, he's not very big. He's not very strong yet. You know, those are the kinds of guys I kind of look at him, you know, probably he'd have to up the compete level a bit, but I see kind of like looking back to previous USHL players that maybe got overlooked because of size, but were high end scorers and had some skill. I think I'm thinking of guys like Jake Gensel, you know, and that's a real lofty. I'm not trying to compare Ben Keevan to Jake Gensel because it, you know, obviously the NHL profile changed, but you just look at how much Jake Gensel was underrated, largely because he was an undersized player in the USHL. Those guys kind of can slip through the cracks and you get some value out of them. So that's one that I like. that's a day 2 pick. Like I'm not saying he's a first rounder. I'm not saying, but like, I think that's a player that probably slips further than he should. And that I do think that he'll find a way to impact an organization positively. So
Can
what do you got?
I just go completely off script here
I
and
love it.
say,
Do it.
who is going to be drafted far earlier than they should? Let's do the inverse. Let's do the flip side on that. Right off the top of your head, who's going way early than they deserve?
I might have to see Ravensburgen.
I
might have to see Ravensburgen.
Nice,
yeah,
nice,
because here's
nice.
like I think that we continue. Like I think there's still a ton of risk in him in particular as a goalie. I've seen him at his best. I've seen him at not good. I think that there are just so many things, so many variables. I think that he'll probably go top 15. And I think that you're going to be waiting for a while for that player. 2, you're also, I just think that there's just too much risk. So for me, I'm always, cautious with goalies. It's been very rare that I put guys in the first round. I mean, like, think about guys like, even like Wallstedt, Askarov, I put lower. Askarov probably is one that I ranked the highest ever. And even then there's a lot of different things. Like, is he going to make it? Is he going to be a star? Like, you need your goalie to be a star. He's got to be a bona fide number one. He's got to be a starter. He's got to be an absolute dud if you're going to take him in the first round and your starter for a long time. To me, I think that he's, even in this weak draft year, there's too much risk there for me. What about yourself?
Man, and I obviously didn't have anything prepared for that when I threw it out there. The guy that I always kind of jump at is Radim Murtka. Is that I didn't like him at the Holinka. I was not impressed at all, despite like sitting around some scouts have been like, "Oh, look at Murtka, look what he just did." And I was like, I'm not impressed at all. He's 6'6". That's why you notice him. I don't love his IQ. I don't like his handling. I think his skating is like he's hunched over. He's powerful with it because he's so big and strong. So I'm going to go with Merck. I think he's going to go too early than he deserves, but I just in like, this is probably going to end up getting clipped now. And I'll probably look like a fool maybe one day, is that I do have some concerns with Porter Martone. I do have some concerns with Porter Martone too. He worries me at points where he just doesn't do much for long stretches of games. Long stretches of games. He'll have a couple flashes, have a couple points. But I wish he was a more complete player and played a more, a 60-minute game or an 18-minute game or however many minutes he's on the ice there. He does worry me a little bit because he's big and he's skilled and he's on the wing, but he's not fast and he's not defensively responsible and he doesn't back check that hard. And I just wonder about Porter Martone if he ends up going 2 or something like that a team might end up regretting and passing on a couple of those guys.
I can't wait until you have your meetings and what comes out of that at the Elite Prospects midterm scouting meetings that you guys are going to have here pretty soon. So, but that weekend is and not Cam. I don't think you're alone there on Martone. So it's going to be interesting to see. And obviously, he slipped a little bit behind on his NHL Central Scouting midterm rankings too, and I know what you're saying. I've seen it myself. So a lot of intrigue though. So, and yes, you're absolutely right. We're just a note to whoever's clipping this, clip that please.
Let's get clipped
for later.
Yeah.
But anyway, all right. So we're just about to the end of the show, and we've been teasing it, and I think it's a fascinating conversation. We got so many Blackhawks related questions about what they should do with number 1 this year. We talked a little bit about what we think they would do if Matthew Schaefer, if they get the number 1 pick, and we still all believe that Matthew Schaefer is the number 1 pick for this year's draft class. So Cam, in our last segment that we do every week, we kind of try to give you an either or scenario, this or that player. However, I'm going to put 3 kind of different scenarios out there. And this is, again, what you would do if you are the Chicago Blackhawks. You win the lottery, you get the number 1 pick. Matthew Schaefer is number 1, the consensus number 1 for this class. So if they get the number 1 pick again, do you take Schaefer? Do you trade back? Or do you take one of the top forwards with the number 1 overall pick? You are in the GM seat for the Chicago Blackhawks. this is the most critical moment of your rebuild outside of drafting Connor Bedard. What do you do?
Yeah, I'm definitely hammering the phone lines. I'm definitely seeing how often do we see a team move back from one, right? Like it just never happens. Not in the NHL anyways. God, because you move back from 1 to like 4 or something like that. What could you pull? What could you like for a team that really want, like if it's San Jose or something, and they're like, we want Matty Schaefer. I just don't see the value is in that trade just by what we see historically. But if there was a value play there, and you can get yourself a different top prospect and then pick 4 or 5 or something like that, and still get, Misa or McQueen or stay in that top 5, that would probably be ideal for them. But if that's not happening, I'm taking Matty Schaefer. I'm not letting past mistakes make my decisions for me today. I'll take Matty Schaefer and I'll be like, there's our power play 1 guy. There's our number 1 defenseman, because I don't think Lev Shanov's a number 1. I don't think Kevin Korchinski's a number 1. I think Matty Schaefer's a 1, and him and Bedard, they can work together. And now you got to go out and do some heavy lifting to go get yourself a real running mate up front for Bedard. So that's what I'm doing. I'm working, I'm hammering the phone lines as much as I can, seeing if I can get a trade back scenario that makes a lot of sense, not just like, it's okay, a lot of sense. Or else I'm taking Matty Schaefer. How about you?
The thing that I think on when I'm looking at, if I'm the Chicago Blackhawks, I've got the number 1 pick, and I've gone through all my meetings, and Matthew Schaefer's the number 1 guy. I'm picking Matthew Schaefer. But here's what I'm doing next. I am taking that player because I believe he's better than what I have currently. He's going to be the number 1 defenseman for my team, which means that the guy that we picked to be the number 1 defenseman, Artem Levshinov, suddenly is not the number 1 defenseman. Kevin Korchinski pushed further down the depth chart. Sam Rinzel, who's having a phenomenal season in Minnesota, is a guy that, what am I looking for him? I am now looking at Levshinov, Rinzel, Korchinski as some of my primary trade chips in order to get that running mate for Connor Bedard. The thing is that when you look at Artem Levshinov, you make that pick and you say, we've got our number 1 defenseman, but if you can find a better one, then you would take that player. I'm a big believer in Artie Levshinov. If I had, but he's also now the guy that has the most. I'm a big believer, but he's the guy that has the most value of those 3 players in a potential trade. Now, does that get you a top line scoring forward? Like, let's say in the scenario you brought up, and it's the San Jose Sharks and they desperately want Matthew Schaefer, what if you say, well, we can't give up Matthew Schaefer, but which young forwards are you willing to give us for Artie Levshinov or something like that, and you start saying, maybe that doesn't make sense for them. And I think for the Sharks, it probably wouldn't, but those are the types of things that you start kind of discussing. But to me, the fascinating question is, obviously you can't predict the future. So last year you pass on Demidov, you pass on, whoever in order to get Levshinov. And again, still a big believer in Marty Levshinov. I've said it before. He's my number. He's number 2 on my list as well. But now you have this really interesting dynamic because you have to get somebody for Bedard. Now, here's the other question I have for you: are any of the forwards that are available, do any of them make sense? Like McQueen, I guess, but that's again a risky potential play on upside and an injured player. Those are the types of things that you kind of start thinking about and discussing. I think for Chicago, I've heard similar to you, like the preference is to get a forward. In all likelihood, they lose the lottery. They pick second, and then they can get whoever they want, outside of that. And also, you never know who's going to get the number 1 pick and who's going to be available. So it could be a choice there. But I think and again, this is in the scenario that they've gone through their meetings and Matthew Schaefer is the number 1 guy on their board. I don't think you deviate from that if you think that he makes you better, because I think that he does. And yes, it creates other headaches, but you have ways to fix those either through trade, through free agency, through whatever else. There's a certain elite scorer in the Minnesota that could potentially become a free agent in the not so distant future. There are opportunities to potentially address that. I just think at the draft, you cannot get that pick wrong, and you have to go with the best player. And if the draft were today, I think a lot of people would say that player is Matthew Schaefer. So that's how we do it. That's how we do it here on Called Up the Prospects podcast. Cam, any other closing thoughts on this incredible choice that could potentially befall the Blackhawks at number 1 overall?
No, I'll save the rest of my thinking for future, because I'm sure we'll have this discussion as it gets closer to the draft too.
There's no doubt, because
they are very interesting.
It is interesting, and that scenario is interesting because the building around Bedard, that getting Bedard was the easiest part of their whole rebuild. Yes. Picking that player was the easiest part, and now it's all the hard stuff.
And he looks hurt, right? He looks hurt. Like he is not enjoying himself losing, right? Like this seems painful for him. You got to get him some help here soon, right?
Yeah, I mean, and he should kind of be used to it, given how things went in Regina as well. So it's kind of, it
wasn't this bad.
Nobody likes to get used to losing, but like that's the way it goes. So yeah, I agree. Like, you got to get it right. So, but anyway, well, Cam, this was a fun episode. A lot of interesting topics. I think in the future, we're going to have a lot of different variety of shows. We're going to have a lot of different variety of topics. I think that there's going to be some fascinating discussions about past drafts as we look at the Calder race and other things that are happening right now across the NHL. But before we get out of here, why don't you tell everybody what's coming up on Elite Prospects?
Big scouting meeting this weekend. The gang's getting together. We'll hammer the table, and I'll try to push Cameron Schmidt down despite his excellent first name. No, I got no beef with Schmitty. But yeah, that'll be a lot of fun. So look for that. We'll drop our next rankings. We got the U23 rankings coming up in a couple weeks. That's a big project that we've been investing a lot of time in, doing the work, putting in the scouting reports, watching all these players. We're going to rank them, and then we're going to rank each organization based on their top U23 talent. So that's always that's going to be a really fun series, I think, too. And then we'll start diving into some more film rooms on some of these draft eligibles as we click into the new year, pushing in deeper into the draft class when people are really starting to pay attention. So lots of fun stuff coming.
Well, yeah, I can't wait to see all that. And coming up on FloHockey, lots more NHL draft coverage, but certainly coverage of all of our member leagues. We've got the AHL All-Star Classic coming up February 2nd and 3rd. You'll be able to watch that on FloHockey, and there will be a lot of coverage of that event. It's one of the great midseason classics. It's one of the most fan-friendly events as well. We will be trying to showcase that for you on FloHockey. Much more NHL draft coverage in terms of rankings, in terms of mock drafts, all of those things are on the way. But of course, you can subscribe to FloHockey to watch all of these leagues that we are tending to talk about these days, and certainly get your fill with leagues like the USHL, the AHL, the ECHL, the FPHL, and all the Canadian junior hockey leagues. The BCHL, I mean, there's so much there and so much fun. We even dipped our toe into Sweden. We got Swedish Hockey League games too. So lots to watch, lots to enjoy. Cam, it's always fun, man. I appreciate you coming on here for yet another fun episode of Called Up the Prospects podcast. We will be signing off and heading back, and there's lots more where this came from. We'll be back at you next week as we discuss much more about what's happening in the world of prospects. For Cam Robinson, I'm Chris Peters. We'll see you guys next time.